guys, so today I'm going to take you through eyeliner and eyebrows. So there's going to be two separate videos. This video is going to be eyebrows and the next one is going to be different eyeliner techniques. So I hope you enjoy and good luck with your practicing. So let's talk eyebrows. This is one of the most important things to practice as a makeup artist. Being able to help balance somebody's eyebrows can really change the shape of their face, and it can really open up the eyes, which is the most important thing, especially if we're working with people who have hooded eyes or maybe a more mature client who doesn't have as many eyebrow hairs. By drawing in the eyebrows, we can create a really beautiful balance to the face, and it really opens up the entire eye area, so we're ready to do eyeshadow afterwards. First, I want to touch on your steps to balance. So you may have heard this trick before, but it's kind of a good way of measuring out where the brows should actually be placed. What we like to do is take a brush or a pencil or anything you have, rest it against the side of your nose, right on the tip of the side of the nose, not where the nostril is, right on the tip. You want to follow this line directly upwards. Where it hits right there at the front of the eyebrow is where the brows should actually start. So a lot of people, especially if they've plucked their eyebrows a lot, will tend to actually have their eyebrows start a little bit further out. And you can see even with my brow hairs, a lot more growth happens a little bit further out. But what I want to aim for is actually the start of my brow to be a little bit closer into this inner part here. That's going to make sure that my brows are really balanced with the shape of my nose and the shape of my eye. Next, you want to take the corner of your brush and hold it against the side of the nostril this time, so the side of the nose. Then you're going to look straight forward and go through the coloured part of your eye, which is the iris. So you're going to hold your brush against the side of your nose next to the nostril, go through the coloured part of your eye and straight up. This little spot here is where you want the arch of your brow to be sitting. So some people will have an arch a little bit higher on one side and a little bit lower on the other side. So it's your job as the makeup artist to make sure that they are balanced. So you may need to apply a little bit extra product to the arch of one eyebrow and less on the other. Then finally, you're going to hold the brush against the side of your nostril again, and then to the outer corner of the eye here, and then follow that straight out. Where the brow stops right there is where you should be ending your brow. A lot of mature clients will tend to lack a lot of hairs in the end of their brow, and you'll notice that their brow actually ends a lot higher up than it's supposed to. So you can then fill in extra brow hairs into the tail of their brow to make sure that their eyes look really open and balanced. So if you're learning still, you could actually take a little bit of concealer on your brush and actually draw in those three lines to map out the shape of the brow and ensure that you are getting the perfect shape on both sides. When I'm mapping out the shape, I always brush the hairs at the front of the brow straight up, and then the ones on the side, I brush them up and diagonally, and then the tail, we want to brush down to the outside corner. And this is going to show you the true shape of someone's natural brows, and you can see where there's any gaps that you may need to fill. So for my brow hairs, for example, I have a little bit less hair right on the top of my eyebrow, so I want to fill in a little bit extra into that point there. You'll also notice there's a lot less hair in the front of the brow and just underneath here. I'm going to fill in a little bit of extra product just there as well. If you notice brow hairs that are really out of place, you are able to pluck them. However, you have to keep in mind any kind of contraindications, which is something that's going to change or adjust the way you have to do the makeup. By plucking out a hair, you potentially could cause a small cut or abrasion on the skin, which can cause blood. So sometimes when you pull out a hair, there will be a little bit of blood. That blood can never ever touch you, and it's really difficult to apply makeup over those areas because we can't apply makeup over somewhere that's like an open wound or anywhere that's producing blood. So for that reason, I prefer not to ever pluck my clients' hairs and instead recommend that they get their brows threaded or waxed 2 to 3 days before they get their makeup done. They cannot get it done the day of makeup, especially with waxing, because the skin becomes very, very raw and you actually remove layers of skin when you do things like waxing. So makeup will just not stick to those areas, and it's not good for your skin to put makeup over areas that have been freshly waxed. So that's why I always recommend my clients just do it a couple days beforehand, or get them to pluck their eyebrows before they come to their makeup appointment, so that I'm not at risk and I don't have to be exposed to any blood. One thing that you can do is trim any very unruly brow hairs. To do that, what you want to do is take a spoolie or take a little brush and brush hairs directly up and kind of hold them in place, just so you can see the ends of the hairs sticking up above the eyebrow. And then you can take a small pair of scissors and make sure that they're sterilized and just trim off the very, very tops of those hairs. Be really careful. It's better to do less than to accidentally cut like a chunk out of somebody's eyebrows, because it's really noticeable. So I just try and do it the absolute minimum. But what that will do is when you brush your hairs, it's going to stop any of those hairs from sticking directly up above the eyebrow and looking really noticeable. And then you just brush through them, brush them back into place. Most of the time you can use concealer and a little bit of strategic placement of your eyebrow products to minimize the look of brow hairs that are out of place. So that is pretty much the extent of what brow grooming I would do for a client, because most of the time you can get away with just not doing anything to their brows and just filling them in like you normally would. And you have to be very delicate about the whole situation as well. So I would never say to a customer, hey, you've got some really bad eyebrows, let me pluck them for you, because that's just rude. Maybe that person doesn't like to pluck their eyebrows. Maybe that person isn't allowed to. It may be a young girl who isn't allowed to pluck out any of their hairs yet. So it really depends on the person and their personal situation. However, if someone asks you to do it, then it's totally fine. But it is one of those kind of sensitive topics that you may not want to bring up. So there are a million different ways of filling in the eyebrows. So I'm going to show you a few different options for you to choose from, and you can see which one works for you best and also what one is going to suit your clients the best. So the first option is to use a powder. This is a specific brow powder. However, you don't need to always use something that's specifically designed for eyebrows. You can just take a regular eyeshadow and use that instead. So something like this light brown and this deeper brown here, something that's completely matte, is going to work just the same as an eyebrow powder would. So I'm going to take a small angled brush like this, something very nice and skinny, so that I'm able to create the illusion of hair strokes. Because this brush is so fine, I'm going to be able to draw in actual hairs. So starting with a lighter color, I like to start with something a little bit lighter in the front of the eyebrow, so that way we can create almost like an ombre effect. And what I'm going to do is line up the point of my nose straight up. And what we're going to do is create a really nice natural line straight up there to mark where we're going to start our eyebrows. Then we're going to line up the corner of the nose straight up to the arch. And I can make a little mark there of where I want the arch of my brow to be. And then I'm going to take the corner of my nose to the corner of my eye and line up where I want the tail of my brow to be. And so once those 3 points are in place, I can begin to fill in the brows. I personally like to start underneath the brow and work my way up. So I'm going to draw a line from that front little point that we made directly horizontally across towards the lower part of the arch, just here. And I'm just using that lighter color. So once I've drawn in that really nice straight line, I'm going to take a mixture of that medium color and the lighter color so that I can tailor it to the shade of my brows. So now I want to imagine that straight line is going to be repeated on top as well. So we're going to draw a straight line from about halfway point of the brow straight out to the arch. And basically link it up with that little point that you made before. And finally, I'm going to take a little bit more product and go from the top of that arch directly down the tail. Just following the direction of the brow hairs themselves. Now I'm going to go into the middle and start to just flick out that product just with what's left on my brush. And now that we've gotten to the front of the brow again, there's basically no product on my brush. I'm just going to use what's left and draw little tiny upwards hair strokes. So I put the point of the brush right along that little edge that we created before and just flick upwards to help blend that line and blend those eyeshadows up into the brow and fill in any gaps. Now I've applied a little bit of product, I'm going to take a disposable spoolie, an eyebrow spoolie like this on a brush that you can clean and sanitize each time you use it, and just brush upwards and through the brow, following the hair growth again. So the ones at the front go straight up, over here they go diagonally, and then the tail comes down. And what you're aiming to do is to soften all of that product and make sure there's no harshness to it. So this is a very naturally filled in brow. It's not as defined as I personally wear it, but it's great for someone who may be a bit more mature or someone who's a bit younger who doesn't like to wear a ton of makeup, or maybe you're doing a bit more of a natural style of makeup. So a more natural style of brow will suit it a lot better. A product that I love to pair up with this sort of style of brow is a tinted brow gel. So these come usually with some kind of spoolie on them, so you need to use a disposable spoolie for this. So taking a clean disposable, I'm going to dip in one time and pull out a little bit of product. You don't want heaps. And then immediately put the original spoolie back in so that you're never tempted to double dip. So now I'm going to use this and I'm going to brush through the brow hairs, especially on the arch where I'm trying to fill in a little bit more and add some more color into the brow hairs. So I'm kind of letting this just trace over the top of the brows, and it's going to add just the tintsiest bit of a tint to the actual brow hairs, which will in turn make the brow look fuller. So I'm just really lightly grazing over the top. So now you can see that's actually tinted some of those hairs that were a little bit naturally lighter to make the brow look fuller and a little bit more fluffy without adding any extra shadow. So that is the more natural kind of style of brow. The next option is to move on to a brow pencil. These come in all different shapes and sizes, but you do have to remember to sanitize before and after you use it every single time. So all you have to do is spray the tip of your brow pencil, wipe it off on a tissue, and then it's ready to use on your client. And then immediately after you use it, you can sanitize it again before you put the lid back on. So the pencil is going to give you a similar effect to the powder because it is a little bit more soft compared to a pomade, for example, but you can get really crisp edges with this by using a little bit of concealer to clean up the edges. For a brow pencil, you can do the exact same technique that we did with the powder, but obviously using a pencil instead of using a brush. So for this, I like to follow the natural brow hair growth and just fill in and wiggle the pencil back and forth to kind of fill in any of those gaps. Obviously you would be doing this without any previous product being there, but I'm going to use this just to fill out this brow even further. So just fill in the gaps. And when I come to the front of the brow, I'm going to do what I did before, which is create that line on the bottom of the brow and then flick upwards to kind of diffuse that bottom line. You'll notice, again, I haven't actually applied any product to the top front of the brow just here. That's because if you end up applying product there, it tends to really cut out the brow and makes people look a lot more angry than they probably want to look. So I like to start with product on the bottom of the brow here, right at the front, and then use your clean spoolie or brow brush to brush the product upwards. That's always going to look so much more natural, and it's going to flatter a lot more faces as well. So I can see a little tiny gap just here, so I'm going to use my pencil to just flick up into those gaps. And then again, we always brush through the brows after we finish them to make sure all the hairs are laid in place where you want them. So now it's a little bit more defined, it's a lot sharper on the edges as well. So if I was going for a natural brow, I would choose powder. If I was going for something in between like this, I would choose a pencil. If I want to do something a little bit more bold and my client is happy to have a little bit more of an intense brow, I'm going to lean towards a brow pomade. So this is a gel eyebrow product. It's going to be completely waterproof, which is the benefit of it. And you have control over how dark or how sharp you make it. So you can actually use this if you want to do a more natural brow, but it will be a lot more pigmented than say a powder or a pencil. They come in little pots like this or little squeezy tubes like this. Totally your personal preference. The squeezy tubes are great for your kit because they won't dry out. So an open pot will tend to dry out over time a lot quicker than something like this, which is completely sealed. So this is a great option for your kit. If you are using a pomade from a pot, you need to decant it. So use the back of your brush or use a spatula to actually remove and scrape out some product. Then immediately close up your product because you don't want it to dry out while it's just sitting there. And then you're going to apply that to the back of your hand or onto your metal palette. If your eyeliner or your eyebrow gel has ever dried out too much, you can always add a drop, and I mean like one drop, of oil into that product to rehydrate it. Something like Inglot Duraline is amazing because it is waterproof, so it's actually going to keep those waterproofing properties to the eyeliner or eyebrow product. But if you don't want to waste half a jar of pomade, then go for it, add a drop in, and it's going to help rehydrate that product again. So I like to take product on both sides of my brush. The reason I do that is to make sure that all of those little hairs get stuck together and it becomes really, really crisp edge on my brush. So we're going to do the same technique we did with this side, where we're going to line up the front, the arch, and the tail of the brow. The front of my brow starts at about the right spot, so that's good. Then the corner of the nose straight through the iris to the arch of the brow, which will be about here. And then the corner of the nose to the corner of the eye, and the tail of the brows right there. So that's a good guide for me to now follow. When I'm using pomade, I like to start where there is the least amount of hair because we're going to put the most amount of product there. So for me, that is this arch area here. So I'm going to first start to just trace in a line all the way up to that arch. And then down the tail, connecting those two lines. You can already see this is a lot more pigmented than say a powder or a pencil. So now I'm going underneath the tail and just smoothing out that underside. Now I'm going to pick up the tiniest bit more product, not too much because we're going to start to migrate to the front of the brow. So lining up the same sort of direction, I want a straight line going from here to here. So I'm going to create a nice straight line across the underside of the brow. And I'm pressing very, very lightly. So once that line is in place, that's going to be my lowest point, and I can use my brush vertically now to flick upwards and actually draw in little tiny hairs. So just starting at that lowest point and flicking up in the direction of the hair growth. I'm again going to take a spoolie and brush through those brow hairs because I want them all to be sitting exactly where they should. Make sure there's no gaps anywhere. So cleaning up the underside of the brow is also really good because if someone has those unruly hairs that weren't plucked out beforehand, this will help kind of conceal them and make sure that they're not sticking out and really obvious. Always blend that down. And then you can also take a little bit more concealer and clean up the top of this point and make those little brow hairs sit really nice and perfect. What I would not recommend is carving out the top of the brow here. Again, that will make their brow look a lot more cut out and fake rather than looking like a nice full natural brow that someone could have actually grown. So you can see the difference between more of a natural style of brow versus the more crisp and cut out style of brow. They're both great, so it really just depends on what you and your clients prefer. So now the brows are filled in, you can leave it at this stage, but if your client has some more crazy brow hairs that don't want to sit where you want them to, what you can do is seal them in place with a brow gel. So you could buy a specific brow gel that's designed to keep them in place. You can also get a little spoolie, spray some hairspray on the spoolie and then comb them through. That works just as well. Or you can get a bar of soap and a wet spoolie and create a slight foam with that soap. So then I just use my hand to kind of scrub that spoolie and create like a little bit of a foam. When it starts to bubble, that's when I know I can use it. So I'm going to use this as my brow gel. So what I want to do is create soap brows, which is a technique of making the brow hairs stick almost directly up and make the brows look really fluffy. So what I like to do is hold the spoolie against the brow and rotate it as I flick upwards. And this is going to coat all of those little hairs and make them sit straight up, which is what we want for this technique. And I'm just cleaning up any edges where it's kind of moved my brow product around. But can you see how that has made all of those hairs kind of stick up and look very bushy? This is a really popular style for photo shoots at the moment, for models on the runway, and to make your brows look even fuller and even bigger than they naturally are. So that is the soap brow technique. You can use the same technique either using a clear brow gel or the soap method to just groom your brows as well. It does work like that, but the benefit of using soap instead of a brow gel is the fact it can make your brows look this fluffy and this spiky. So those are some different ways of filling in the brow. Your goal is to always balance the face as much as possible and make sure that they're as even as possible, but nobody's brows are perfectly symmetrical, so don't go crazy over it. Just do your best to make sure that they look even. As they say, eyebrows are sisters, not twins. They're never going to be exactly the same, but us as makeup artists can do our best to make sure that they look as even as possible. So I hope you enjoyed the brow tutorial, and next up we're going to do some eyeliner, so make sure you go and watch that video as well. Bye!